We're back. Welcome to the BWI Live Recruiting Show. Spring recruiting is about to heat up. Lots of things going on in the next couple of weeks, and guys who know about it. My intros are always so lame because I don't know all the information. I don't know exactly what to preview, what's the most important. You know who does? Ryan Snyder. He's our recruiting expert for BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Ryan, welcome to the show. Fitz is going to be joining us in a minute. We're a little bit late because we had some technical issues to start the show, but you're here.
Where the hell is Fitz?
Fitz
is always late. Always. I wasn't even supposed to be here today, and now I'm the one on time. Jesus, Fitz.
Well, let's not call 1 minute before we start being on time. Let's
Fair.
leave some. Let's leave that. Anyway, what's going on with Penn State recruiting this spring so far? What are we talking about today? What you've been doing a great job at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So much information over there. What are we talking about today? What's important to you for what's coming up the next couple of weeks?
We have a lot coming up. These next 4 or 5 weeks are going to set the trend, set the tone, I guess is the right way to put it, for how Penn State's 2026 class is going to shape up, right? We've seen, 60 official visits now and all that good stuff. But in a lot of ways, I've stressed that these spring visits are more important in some ways because a lot of guys are going to commit elsewhere. They're going to, obviously, these players are going to multiple schools. A lot of guys are going to come off of that list. And there's going to be guys who emerge who maybe don't have an offer yet or, play down south, haven't really been to Penn State yet, that become players that we're talking about a lot in June. So the next 4 weeks really are going to play a major role in, at the end of the day, does Penn State have a top 10 class, right? Because we've seen it be in 6, 7, 8, somewhere in that ballpark over the last couple of months. That it looks positive right now. Obviously, a lot of rankings and stuff have to change, so I don't want to overthink that too much. But, when you have Kevin Brown, we'll see what happens with Mickens. I still feel like Mickens should end up at Penn State. You obviously have, other talented guys in this class, 4 stars and up. It's going to play a major role in really just to telling if this is going to be a top 10 class. So every 4 years or so, that's how it plays out. This is that year, and they're off to that great start. But, man, these spring visits are massive.
So this is a question I had. I think there's maybe a feeling of a twitch of this. This happens every year where there's a certain period where Penn State does not get any commitments, and maybe they lose one. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. Is this a slump or is this part of the cycle where they're in right now, where, Caden Gebhardt goes to Clemson, but they haven't gotten a commitment in a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so? How do you gauge the concern-o-meter? Because right now I would say the momentum is not for them to be in that trending in that direction, but that means nothing because the day-to-day of the announcements of those things is very different than what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, we're just under 9 months, I think, until December. I don't even want to think about December right now. We're just getting into spring, right? Which after a long winter, it's the last thing I want to think about at the moment. But my point with that being is just so much has to play out still. Yes, losing out on Caden Gebhardt to some ways hurts. Now Caden, I'll also stress, was kind of a tweener. And don't get me wrong, Penn State wanted Caden Gebhardt. I'm not trying to. I feel like we pump guys up and then they go elsewhere, and then we point out the flaws of different things. But it is important to note that Caden was always looked upon as a guy who, where does he actually fit? And then that always gives concern to other people in Nash. You got to remember, we talk about Marcus Hagan's overseas wide receivers, right? Or whatever it may be. But this is always 20 some people kind of coming together and giving their opinions on stuff. And that was always the big thing with Caden. But I think Caden's an awesome kid. I think he's a very good player. I mean, this is a guy that if you put, in a position, to really make tackles between the hashes, he'll make 100 tackles for you a year. So it's a loss from that perspective. But at the same time, you have Max C committed. If you get Joey O'Brien, I don't think anyone's going to be all that concerned about missing out on Caden Gebhardt. So
he was
all about these next 4 weeks. Go ahead.
His highlight tape was also a walking targeting penalty. The ability that he showed to lower his head into any tackle. It's currently loading. I was trying to get it here for this particular conversation. We'll get to it in a second if it gets up in time. But I guess what is the overall impact or the outlook there? You got Matt Sieg. There are other safeties on the board. How deep is generally, from your understanding, is Penn State's safety position to absorb a loss of a guy that I think we were talking about? We were talking about a guy that may be committed during this period that we're talking about as so important.
You cut out there a little bit, T-Frank. I'm not sure if everybody else could hear that or not, but I believe you're asking about the safety board a little bit there.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, they need 2 quality safeties in this class. I think Daryl Carey at the Math is an important player that we probably haven't talked about enough. He's kind of gone a little bit under the radar, especially really in the last 2 months. Like I feel like we talked about him a good bit in December and January, kind of dipped a little bit, but I think Daryl Carey's a guy that they're very high on, and then of course Joey O'Brien as well. Sean Johnson from Mark Bishop Spalding is going to take an official visit as well. He's only been at Penn State one time, and that was really for a Malik Washington visit that he just kind of tagged along on. So he's going to be here this spring. I forget the exact date off the top of my head, but that will really tell us a lot for how serious of a contender Penn State will be with Sean Johnson. But there's other guys obviously out nationally. You have Cameron, I think it's Himmel out in Arizona. We'll see if much comes from that, but he's supposed to take an official visit. And then you have the Caden Halls of the world, and maybe CJ Brunel, although I think he's probably more of a corner. He has the size to safety, but whenever you run a 10-3 100 meter, you can certainly probably play corner. So there's plenty of options out there. We'll see where things go. But it's really at the end of the day, to me, it comes down to, can you get Joey O'Brien? Because if you get Joey O'Brien, I think everybody's very happy. Dex is very happy. But I will also stress that Daryl Carey is an important player that we need to be talking about more.
Joining us now on the show is Sean Fitz. We're having all kinds of technical issues. I don't know if you can even hear me right now. Fitz, welcome to the show. You guys talk for a second. I'm going to go throw my router out a window, and I'll be right back.
That's the way to do it. I just did it with my laptop, which looks like it's on its last leg here. I think it just completed its last football season. So hopefully we get that thing turned around at some point. But yeah, I mean, I was listening to you while I was getting here, and you were talking about Gephardt, and we're talking about the losses and stuff like this. And you and I were talking yesterday, and this is the sort of thing that comes in waves this time of year. And I think with Penn State's schedule setting up the way it does, with the late start in spring and the no visitors, and until I guess tomorrow will be the first time they have guys on campus, that you're going to have to be patient here, and you're going to have to wait. And at the same time, you're going to have to take some punches. And I mean, I'm not going to like beat around the bush here. It's going to get worse than Caden Gephardt. There's going to be guys that we expect to end up at Penn State that don't end up at Penn State. And there's going to be guys that aren't really talking, or we're not really talking about on our radar right now, that are going to end up at Penn State. So, I mean, it's all part of the cycle. It's the circle of life, as we say. It's really one of those things. So, but yeah, I think Joey O'Brien's key in this situation. And T. Frank got into it a little bit with, I hate when someone goes elsewhere, and it's the sour grapes and the walking targeting penalty, all that kind of stuff. Caden Gephardt's a great player, and he's a really good fit for Tom Allen's defense. I don't think he vibed all that well with Jim Knowles compared to Tom Allen, which, I mean, that's the personal preference there. So I think that's what it comes down to. Of course, Clemson comes on and has this weekend where they get Adam Guthrie and they get Connor Salmon, who I think, Connor Salmon, definitely.
Connor Salmon's a bigger loss than Caden Gephardt.
That's a really good.
I definitely think that.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, you can't replicate that speed, obviously. I mean, he's got it. I think he's got a lot to work on in terms of receiving skills and things like that. But the speed is something you can't really get anywhere else. So I think that, it's a loss. But at the same time, I don't know, man, it's tight. And I didn't think about this before we came on, so I'm kind of riffing here and trying to process it in my mind, but it's close. But yeah, I think there's definitely guys out there that, could soften the blow. Joey O'Brien's one, and then the offense, you want to get some receivers, and that's everybody's looking at this. It's kind of like a snow globe. You're just kind of on the outside looking at what's going on in there, and everything that's going on in there is happening at other schools right now. Well, it's going to happen at Penn State eventually. It's just going to be part of the cycle. Would you agree?
Which is why, yeah, for sure. Which is why I point to Salmon too, just because Messiah Hampton's blowing up now. Like Messiah Hampton was a guy we had circled. That is changing. Quake Guilford decommits. Like obviously we feel good about Deshear and LeVar Keys, but Connor Salmon, there was a true top three there. Notre Dame, Clemson, Penn State. Like that was a true top three.
That made a lot of sense. By the way.
Yes, it made a ton of sense. Like all three of those, like they're all very similar in a lot of ways. So that's why I just look at that as a little bit more of a loss. One thing I want to stress before we move on to Frank is just that we're talking about like the ups and downs of spring visits and where Penn State's kind of at. Like, I think a lot of people will also point to Joey O'Brien, going out and visiting all these other schools here in the coming weeks, and Damari Simeon not having a visit set with Penn State. It's really important to stress. You guys got to remember that they have visited Penn State, 4 or 5 times each now, at least. I mean, Simeon's been at least 3, I think. Like, these guys have to go out and see these other schools. like Damari Simeon especially has not really gone out and seen a lot of these other schools. So I understand why on the surface it looks bad or negative for Penn State, just because they're not getting back on campus all the time regularly. Maybe it's been a little bit of a gap there. But at the same time, like these guys can't make that decision without going out and seeing these schools at some point.
And before they committed, how many schools did Messiah Mickens commit or visit? How many schools did Keemon Spell visit? You know, these guys that make these early decisions, and now that they're, you know, going to take visits elsewhere, it makes sense because you want to see your options. You want to check it out. And it's not, again, I'll go back to the same thing I say. It's not all money. Like it's not a situation where Clemson was, you know, you had a bunch of guys in town, you're just throwing out bags of money. It's not how they work. They work very similar to Penn State in that they don't really talk about NIL until a little bit later in the process. And I think when we get there, that's when you see sort of some of that splintering in terms of like guys that all of a sudden were really interested might not be, or guys that were not on the board all of a sudden come into play. So I think that's kind of what you got with how that's working. And I mentioned Connor Salmon's top three of Notre Dame and Clemson. I think you're going to see a lot of overlap with those schools because they are similar to what Penn State's doing. Michigan's the same way. You know, there's a boat of schools with prospects that make a lot of sense for Penn State, but they also make a lot of sense for Notre Dame, Clemson, Michigan, a couple other ones in there.
Have we talked about Smith Vilbert yet? Have we gotten to that particular conversation point? All right.
Nope.
So Smith Vilbert.
We're talking white safeties. We didn't get into Smith Vilbert. No.
I don't know. I don't know if you can even hear me. My internet is terrible. I pay a lot of money to have good internet to do this, and I can't tell. I don't know if you can tell, but like I'm seething with rage right now. So I apologize if I start glitching on air, literally and metaphorically. Smith Vilbert commits to North Carolina. Time now to the conversation about the portal window, put a bow on the story for Smith Vilbert, and what the spring is going to look like for the Nittany Lions with the portal window. So I don't know what you caught of that, Fitz, but just to the end of this.
T. Frank.
Right.
The only thing that we got was your New England joke. Basically, that was the only thing that came through really clearly, which I love that as you're spazzing out, you can still make the New England, North Carolina joke. But yeah, Smith Vilbert to North Carolina. Didn't hear much on that recruitment. Honestly, Texas Tech was the one that we heard like right away. So there was some things at play here in terms of sort of luring that guy into the portal with agent talk and things like that. I don't want to call it tampering because it's happening everywhere and it's something that goes on in this new world. But yeah, it was a situation where he had a lot of suitors because he is a big guy that can move, who has experience. He's got playoff experience. He's got postseason numbers that, we look back on and we just kind of be like, okay. No, he's played a lot of football, and I think that there's a lot of value in that. And as we said it on the chat earlier this week, as we phase out the COVID years, the veterans and the guys that have been around for a while and the guys like Smith Vilbert are going to be very valuable because we've seen Ohio State use it. We've seen Michigan win a national championship on it 2 years ago. So those guys have an exceeding amount of value because of what they bring to the table, especially up front. Like the offensive and defensive lines, massive in terms of if you can get the older guys to stick around as long as they can and develop and actually be, 23-year-old maulers going against 20-year-old kids, that's I call them kids, but obviously that's a little hyperbole there. But yeah, if you get those experienced guys going against the younger guys, it works out well for them. There's a reason the older players, there's a reason the NFL wants you to wait 3 years to enter the draft. It's because that development is very important because it's very freshman versus senior, usually pretty one-sided. So I think it's a good landing spot for him in terms of a fresh start, in terms of fresh start for everybody down there. You're going to a place where I don't know the depth chart, but you've got an opportunity to step in right away. Very curious where he would have been coming out of spring with Penn State. Could have been a starter. Could have also been a second teamer, which you're coming back for a 6th year. You're probably not coming back to be a second teamer, right? You're probably looking to be a guy that can be a starter, and they feel really good at end with Denai Dennis Sutton and Zariah Fisher. If he can stay healthy, I think is going to be the other starter. And then you go to the interior, which we thought Smith was going to play some interior as well. And you've got Zane Durant and Alonzo Ford coming back. So just very curious where that bubble would have been for him because he's versatile. He's kind of flexible in what he can do and provide for your defense, but at the same time, not a world beater, not a guy that's going to fundamentally change your pass rush or anything like that.
He'll fit into the New England system in North Carolina because they don't really. They value run stopping. They value versatility. They like to scheme up pass rushing. And I'm assuming Bill Belichick isn't changing his ways because he didn't change his ways in 20 years. So he really fits well into what they want to do. I can't remember the big German guy they used to have along the defensive line that played for them that was a really good run stuffer, really versatile. He reminds me in that system what they could do there. So I think the starting opportunity is pretty good for a 6-year player like that. And the lure of, hey, this is an NFL system. You're going to play in an NFL system. You're going to go to the NFL. Like, this is an opportunity. Makes sense in a lot of different ways. Today's show, if we get through this, is brought to you by My Perfect Franchise. Andy Ludicky is a franchise consultant who is able to provide people who are interested in taking the next step in their career with a way forward. He has gone through the franchise purchasing process multiple times, has the experience of what to do, what not to do, mistakes to make, and the last thing we talked about, fads. He likes to talk to us once every 6 months or so, just going to check in, see how we're doing. He likes to talk sports. He's a huge recruiting fan, so we get a chance to know him a little bit. And the last thing he was talking about was AI, because who isn't talking about AI? Your grandmother is probably talking about AI. But here's the thing. Andy's not like, hey, buy anything that has AI slapped to it. He says, is this a fad? Because fads come and go in business all the time, and they typically fail. So he's not interested in putting you in those situations. He wants to put you in a situation where you can succeed, even if that means that maybe there isn't one for you right now. So you can talk to him, 404-973-9901, to call him, Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. You can go to his email address, or you can go to myperfectfranchise.net, get on his calendar, and have a conversation. Thanks, Andy, for supporting the show. Let's get into spring visits. So the Nittany Lions have a good number of players that are becoming here for the next couple of months. Ryan, who are the names you want to talk about when it comes to spring visits in the next couple of weeks that you think are really important?
Yeah, well, first the numbers. First off, T. Frank, you're better, but you're cutting out again now. We were so close to having you fully back, and then it started to cut out again. But just a heads up. Right now we're at 65. 67, somewhere in that ballpark, total names confirmed. Out of those 65, 67, it's about a little over 40 scholarship guys. Pretty good numbers there, I would say, so far. And those numbers are going to expand, obviously, drastically. That really doesn't include the blue-white game all that much, which usually is 100 plus. I think right now we've got, I don't know, maybe dozen to 15 guys confirmed for the blue-white game, so that's going to expand a lot. Sean, 200 guys visiting over the course of the spring. Do you think that's fair? 250, maybe even? Like, we're talking, don't get me wrong, out of those 200 or so, we're talking guys, a lot of guys that don't matter. But I'm just trying to give a perspective of how many guys are going to host for spring. You're on mute, buddy.
It's we're putting together a hell of a show today. It's strong on the weekends as usual. And the I guess the sort of the exception there, Easter, kind of, you have to work around that, obviously. But you've got, you're strong on the weekends. Tuesday, Thursdays are practices. So you get a lot of local guys in there. And then you got guys that are, popping up when they can, basically on their spring break. So it's a lot of guys, and they'll bring buses of, kids from Michigan and stuff in, just to check out practice that are 7-on-7s, or maybe on the way to a 7-on-7 somewhere. So you've got an opportunity to sort of impress like that. It's been interesting to look back, and we see so many guys that were on campus as freshmen and sophomores in this situation where you come in for a spring practice that's part of Team Evolve or something from Pittsburgh, or the Rising Stars from Michigan. Think guys that really are not on the radar at this point, but it's a first impression and it's worked pretty well for them. There's definitely a lot of guys on Penn State's roster that have come through in this situation that have made it work. The spring game is going to be interesting because nobody knows what the spring game is going to look like at this point. And that's from like the most literal term, because nobody knows what the stadium looks like at this point. And if you can actually make that functional, Penn State's still planning on having guys in. I don't know if you caught the exchange between Leighton Von Brandt, Keemon Spell's planning on coming up for the spring game, which is good because he's going to visit a couple other schools, Notre Dame in there as well. But no, you've got to make the most of these times. They've expanded the recruiting staff, or continue to expand the recruiting staff. Just brought in Naz Oliver, so I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of Jersey guys that are going to come in for spring practices. So yeah, the number 200 seems big. There'll be some filler in there. Obviously, it always happens, but yeah, it's going to be an active spring. And like I said, the calendar is fascinating because they start spring practice on Tuesday. So you're going to have, a handful of guys, nothing really this weekend. And like I said, there's a couple guys coming in tomorrow, but nothing really over the weekend. And then all of a sudden it's like 3 to 5 guys popping up, or maybe 3 to 8 or something like that, popping up Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then open it up for the weekends. So you've got opportunities there. And I think it's, you're looking at guys. You mentioned Joey O'Brien. You mentioned Damari Simeon, those guys. Alex Haskell's got his set. Carter Meadows has his set. But you've got guys that are visiting other schools right now, and you're sort of, as a Penn State fan, sort of there hand-wringing and seeing what's happening. And a couple of them might come off the board, as they did with Gebhardt and Salmon to Clemson. But, I think it's going to, by the time we get to April, sort of balance itself out. So
For sure.
if you're on the ledge, I mean, it's April. Like you're going to lose guys. Like I said, you're going to get guys, but you're going to lose guys, and it's going to be part of the process. I mean, it's 2025. We've been doing this for a while, Ryan. I know the names are different. I know the money's different, but is the recruiting process that much different? I don't know that it is.
No, not really. It's still, and before you joined us, like I've always looked at these spring visits as massively important. When it really comes to setting the tone of what your class is going to be, I kind of set that up in the beginning, so I'm not going to go rehash through all that. But like, to me, how a lot of these visits go determine the official visits, which really determines, can Penn State get a top 10 class this year? So that's not trying to overhype these next 4 or 5 weeks, but I think that they are critically important for Penn State to take that next step with a couple of these guys. Speaking of massively important guys that we got to talk about, Carter Meadows, I think we have to lead it off there just because that will be a March 25th visit coming up here. So next Tuesday. So we're five days away from that. 5-star guy now, massively important. We confirmed that on Sunday, going to a handful of schools over the next couple of weeks. But, we thought for a while that Penn State had a very good opportunity with Carter Meadows. Of course, as soon as he got that 5-star rating, I think LSU offered, Auburn offered. There was a couple other, powerhouse SEC schools that hopped into the mix there. But right now, his schedule looks like it's going to be Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Stanford. I've seen Stanford a good bit actually here the last couple of weeks.
Where did he go? Where was his first visit this spring? He just went there last week. Went to Northwestern. Like this is an academic kid, and we kind of said that throughout the process. And then he gets 5 stars, and how does that change things? I don't know, because the bottom line goes up there. But this is a kid that fits what that battle at Gonzaga that Penn State and Michigan have been fighting for years. And Penn State's won a couple, Michigan's won the more recent ones. But it's going to be that type of kid. It's going to be that type of academics are still important to me, and I'm going to make this work. So he's going to visit Northwestern. He's going to visit Stanford, as you mentioned. He's going to visit Penn State, Michigan, these guys that sort of fill out the academic athletic balance. And I think that, yes, it's going to change some things, but I'm looking at the kid and saying, I don't know that it changes everything with him.
No, and I've just seen Stanford pop up for a handful of guys. I know Cannon Smith was one of them. I thought Bryce Gilmore, offensive lineman, was another one. It's just an intriguing one, just because Stanford hasn't really been much. But again, if you're going to Stanford, there's a reason you're going to Stanford. Who was was it Benedict Ume who went to Stanford?
Yeah. I wonder how he's doing. He's the one. He committed to Stanford, or he went to Stanford, and obviously battled cancer as a senior there.
Right.
At Avon Old Farms. So hopefully he's doing well. He's a great kid, man.
Awesome. So, but my point with all that being is massively important. A couple of weeks coming up here for Carter Meadows. He doesn't have official visits set. So this will set the tone, I think, for who all gets officials. I feel pretty confident Penn State should get one of those. Michigan feels like another one that should. Ohio State, I can't remember. Was Ohio State one of the more recent offers for Carter, or was that there's another one that Ohio State kind of somewhat recently offered. Can't remember if that's for Carter or not. I'll have to double check on that. But where are they at in the mix too? Because it's Ohio State, right? Like, let's not beat around the bush there. They are a top program for a reason. So time will tell with that one. But I think Carter Meadows has to be kind of one guy that we have really circled here over the next couple of weeks, because that's where he goes and how things play out should be really, really important. Go ahead. Do you have anything, sir?
No, you're good.
Okay. I think April 5th is setting up to be the first big weekend. Like the March 29th, we'll get a better feel for that, I think, over the next couple of days. Like there's a couple guys March 29th. By the way, Troy Hune's coming in for a whole week, guys. I thought that's pretty cool. Coming out from California. He'll be here, I think it is the 28th, and then he leaves on April 4th, I want to say. I think those were the dates. But he's going to be here for that 29th practice and on the April 3rd practice. And like I said, the 29th has a couple of guys not going to get into all of them right now because we keep some of that stuff on the board. We've talked about Ellis Alloway a little bit, kid linebacker from Florida. He's going to be one of those guys. But to transition over to April 5th, like that's the date right now that I kind of have circled as the first marquee weekend of the spring. Couple guys standing out right there. Max Sutter, obviously one of Ty Howell's top guys. Now Ty Howell just also offered, was it 2026 tight ends? I know he offered a couple.
26 tight ends, yes. And one has set up a visit that I'll have a story about shortly after the show. Awesome.
So my point with that is usually when you start seeing that, Ty's probably not getting great feelings about maybe where Max Sutter's heading. I know Mac has 2 official visits in April to Illinois and Ole Miss, which are interesting. Illinois has always been a school circle because it's kind of the hometown school. He's been there a ton. I'm not sure if he's hearing anything behind the scenes on maybe Sutter's going to end his recruitment before he takes OVs or not. But, just the fact that Ty's been offering 2026 tight ends certainly grabs my attention. I wrote up the other day, yesterday actually, was like just kind of a couple storylines for the spring. Matthew Canu is a guy that I think you really should have circled here. Already admitted in January that Penn State's the team to beat. He's going to be back on April 5th. Why I think he's most intriguing, though, is, and maybe we'll circle back to the end to hear on why the late spring is so important, is, Penn State's like the only game in town, right. April 26th. It's Rutgers and Oregon. Those are the only 3 Power 5 schools, Power 4 schools, I should say, that have spring games.
I can't wait till some regional prospects go out to Oregon that weekend. It's going to be the board's going to be wonderful.
I just jinxed it.
Yeah.
My point being is like there's been a lot of examples over the last couple of years of guys coming in for those early spring visits and then they circle back for the blue-white game, and maybe they don't commit blue-white weekend, but they will commit, maybe in early May or something like that. So I think he's a guy to really keep an eye on. Now, at the same time, Michigan certainly seems to be in the mix. There's some other schools that have offered as well. I don't want to jinx it and say that I definitely think that's going to come. But like, if there's a guy that I would have circled for an early spring visit, maybe come back then late and potentially could commit, Canu makes a lot of sense there. I know he's also planning to go to South Carolina and Wisconsin. Those are April 12th and April 17th. But obviously that's not April 26th. So his weekends are open to potentially come back for that blue-white game. One last guy I want to mention on the April 5th date is Garrett Witherington, the defensive lineman out of Alabama. This is kind of a recon mission in some ways, just because Kenny Sanders, I believe, is the one who went down there in Alabama in January. Obviously, the recruiting staff seems to be pretty high on him. Let's see how Deion Barnes, how the relationship goes, and obviously what James Franklin thinks of things. But to me, like when I'm getting to know the kid a little bit, learning more about him, like there's a lot of things here that make sense for Penn State. Now he's from Alabama too, right? So I don't want to like pretend that he's going to definitely come north, because there are some Southern schools, but it's also he doesn't have the Alabamas and the Georgias and those kind of schools coming after him. Like Penn State seems to be the most prominent, football program, at least, that's really pushing for him. So how that visit goes, he's like one of those guys that there's a handful of them are going to come from the South. And I really think that how those spring visit goes, like he could be a guy in June that we're talking about a lot. Again, if Deion Barnes likes him and a lot of other things, it's kind of a recon mission in some ways, but just from getting to know the kid, like it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. You got to have him on campus to get him actually measured, because Kenny looks up at everybody and thinks they're 6'5" or whatever.
So I know the feeling.
No, I mean, you've got situations like that. And it's interesting that you mentioned the SEC schools coming along for defensive linemen right now, because I think we're in that stage. And I remember saying it this time last year that you're going to see guys that I don't want to call them just like middle of the pack guys, but like guys that weren't at the very top of Penn State's board. They're going to get some really good offers. Like they're going to get some big time ones. Marcus Almada this week just picked up Penn State, but he also, before that picked up Clemson. Before that picked up earlier that day picked up Notre Dame. Alabama's going to come in, I think, for him. Ohio State might come in for him. He's Carter Gooden's teammate up at Tabor Academy. So you've got like situations where when you've got big guys that can move like that is this kid's, if this kid is, I don't have the measurements on me, but he's listed at 6'4", 280. If you can move like that, they're going to find you and they're going to offer you. And again, all offers are not built the same. All offers are not created equal. So this might be a situation where, you come in and give him the offer, and then you want to go up and see their showcase in May or something like that and see how he moves, and then figure out the official visits from there. Again, I still think there's a bunch of movement to come on the official visit schedule for everybody. But you've got an opportunity like that, especially with defensive linemen, because they're so valuable. And Phil Troutwine on the opposite side has set up a dozen offensive tackles or offensive linemen for official visits. So like you're seeing the value in those positions right now in terms of they want to get as many of those guys into the program as they can, because as we mentioned, transfer offensive linemen, very expensive, especially tackles, very expensive. So if you can find somebody like that, like last year, they had Owen Alicini in the class pretty early. No drama, nothing happened with him at all. And all of a sudden he's at Penn State. He's doing well. Like he's doing a good job with his offseason stuff. And maybe that's a guy that turns into an Egan Boyer or, Anthony Donka is a guy that's actually has some proof of purchase there. So you've got a lot to like on the offensive line, even if the stars may not necessarily say it. I think you're going to see some big offers for some guys that have just modest ratings right now.
I've been pushing Owen for a year, but we're not going to get into our favorites. But I think you should know by now that Owen was one of mine. So, I think T. Frank died. I don't know. He might. I don't know if he's alive. He probably electrocuted himself.
To be honest with you, I think we're doing good stuff. It's just a matter of
hey, look at that.
No, I'm not. I'm not here. I may be here, but I'm not here. I have
it's a 56K modem. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting like 161 megabits per second. My upload speed is 0, so I don't know how I'm here right now. But, I'm just here to end the show because I have to physically end the show.
I was
okay, T-Frank. Yeah, you can leave now. We can't hear you, buddy. It's all good. All good.
All right, Ryan.
Well, Sean, let's just keep rolling through the list here because we got nothing else going on right now. Might as well just talk about all these names. We got Cannon Smith, Grayson McHugh. Hey, we want to talk about offensive linemen and Phil Troutwine and guys he has official visits set with. I think both of those two are interesting guys. I think Cannon Smith is just a guy, out of Denver. Let me clarify. Going to be visiting for the first time. Just picked up an offer somewhat recently, but like that's a relationship that I think is going pretty well. Just from talking to people behind the scenes, like another kid who makes a lot of sense for Penn State, but he's also going literally all over the country over the next couple of weeks. So another one where official visits are going to be massively important. I think Alabama, and I think you already went to Alabama. I thought Oregon, Ohio State, Stanford. He was one of the for guys. USC was another one. So like, let's see how those schools shape out. But as far as like a kid who makes a lot of sense for Penn State, pretty important one there. And then Grayson McHugh, Sean, Grayson McHugh. Like I'll throw it to you. Just like a guy that we thought Penn State would like, and then I was hesitant to talk about him because I wasn't sure if they were all in on him. And then it kind of seems like now they're all in on him.
Yeah, and it seems like other schools are starting to catch up. He's gotten some other offers. He's set up some official visits. Duke, of course, is in there. Gabe Infante, the former St. Joe's Prep head coach, is now with Manny at Duke, and kids in Philly really like him. So I'm not surprised that he's got an official visit set up there. He's a 4-star by on 3. 24/7 has him as an 88 high 3-star. So like that's one of those guys that you look at and say, okay, this frame works, this athleticism works. He plays a couple different sports. So a lot of those things really work out, and they keep building them bigger, man. Like you go back and I talked to Garrett Sexton a couple weeks ago. Unfortunately, we didn't get Boyer to see him in person, but they just keep getting bigger. Owen Alicini's close to 6'8". These tackles are huge, man. So if he steps into that room, I think he will feel pretty well. He'll fit pretty well. He'll fit in pretty well. So Grayson McHugh is definitely a guy that we continue to look at as one that makes a ton of sense for Penn State. Along the offensive line, there's some other guys in there. Marquee Walbridge from Massachusetts. That is a guy that I can see continuing to heat up. I'm not sure if he had. If he got the Ohio State offer, but I know he did get the Ohio State offer. Okay.
Yeah.
But they've been mentioned. Michigan's been mentioned. It's one of those ones that's going to come down to some schools that Penn State's used to going head to head with. But Walbridge has been on campus a couple of times, and he's got the official visit set up for the summer as well. So, just a couple of guys that make sense. Like that's what I keep going back to. And, they'll get to a little bit later in the process when they get to start hammering out brass tacks and talking details and things like that. But kind of at that point right now where you're just kind of, preparing yourself for that bank of prospects that are probably not going to make it to official visits. Mentioned Alex Haskell, defensive tackle from Philly. He's one of those guys that fits the mold, but for the most part, and talked about this show on the show on Tuesday, I'm curious to get your thoughts, is that I feel like a lot of prospects have seen the process. They've seen all the official visits, and it's kind of like sort of a follower mold type right now, because they think that they have to go on these official visits, and they think that they need these official visits to make a decision. It's not always the case, but that's kind of where we're at. And the calendar is sort of stringing it out until we get to June, which is a really interesting viewpoint. I think the question in the mailbag this week was the difference between official and unofficial visits. And you and I are in the same boat, that you can get as much or maybe more out of an unofficial visit in the spring as you can out of a summer official visit.
Especially if you're willing to hang out for a couple of days, obviously. So,
or a week.
I would say
hit you up a day when Troy Hune's here and have you go run routes for him or something like that, just to pass you got to pass a week in State College. It's very different than Southern California.
Yeah, especially when your parents are with you. If your parents weren't with you, man, you could find some fun in State College for a couple of days. But anyway, sorry if Mr. Hune are listening. Hey, I want to circle back to Alex Haskell, though, because you mentioned he's not going to be taking official visits, which is funny because Sean reported on that. I thought I learned that 3 weeks later, put it on the message board, and Sean had a good laugh about, hey, buddy, that's been out there for a while. We've been joking about that for a little bit now. But Haskell's interesting. Michigan, Duke. Who's the other one? Who am I missing, Sean? Who's the other one? Oh, Syracuse. He's going to go to Syracuse this weekend, actually. So Syracuse this weekend. Duke will be April 4th to the 5th. And then Michigan, I think, is April 11th to the 12th. Penn State's the last one, April 18th to the 19th. Like, this one makes a lot of sense. Like, he really, if I had to put in a pick today, it would have to be Penn State. And, like, what's even more intriguing to me is he hasn't even been to Michigan. He hasn't even been to Syracuse. Like, those are his first visits to both schools. And they are his top four. And basically after these 4 spring visits, he's going to make a decision here probably late April, early May. He has been the Duke. Of course, you mentioned Gabe Infante. Haskell does play at St. Joseph's Prep, so there is a relationship there. He's actually been the Duke more than I realized, too. He's been there a couple of times. That was something that I think if you looked at his profile a couple months ago, you would have seen like one Duke visit and like 6 or 7 Penn State visits. He's actually been down there about 3 or 4 times now, I believe. So this feels like a Penn State Duke battle, but it also feels like this should be one that Penn State should win in the end. I feel like he's probably still one of the most underrated guys in the state when you look at our ratings and all that. He's a guy certainly that's it's going to be kind of hard to dig and get a lot of quality information on. He did test at Penn State back as a freshman, but aside from that, it's been kind of hard to get more recent numbers and things like that. So I think that's part of the reason why he's a little bit underrated. But to me, Alex Haskell, without a doubt, is one of Deion Barnes' top 4 or 5 defensive linemen, at least in the region. Guys that kind of seem realistic. Certainly a guy that he's been pushing for a long time, and a player that I think should end up at Penn State. I think we'll learn probably at the end of April what's going on there.
Got a question from Joe here. He says, do you predict more recruiting wins in the spring before OVs or more in June with the OVs happening?
Oh,
definitely in the summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be one of those things when we talk about potential spring decisions, we're probably talking about 3-4 guys, maybe something like that. And like I said, I think these guys feel like they have to wait till the summer, not only to check out their options, but also because that's kind of like you're falling in line, and that's how the game is, or at least that's how they feel the game is right now. So June and July, once again, I mean, that's been the haven for commitments the last couple of years, and I think that's going to continue to be the case. Probably a situation where you bring in a couple of guys. Now, they did add a weekend in May, which is really interesting because that never happened before. The weekend of the 14th
to the 16th, I think.
Yeah, 14th to the 16th, which is the All-22 Elite 11 weekend as well. So there's gonna be a ton of guys in town that weekend, regardless, on top of official visits. But so do you consider that spring or summer? That's summer to me right now. So, but you could see something out of there. And the first weekend, the May 31st weekend, which is when the commitments are coming in. But there's also usually a sprinkle of guys that are thrown in there, whether it's just a schedule fit or a personality fit with the guys that you feel like work with the guys that you have committed in your class. Usually there's a bit of I don't want to say a boom, but a couple of guys jump on board after that first weekend. And then you get into the guys that are taking a trip every weekend. And then you get to the end of June. And that's sort of when you guys settle. And that's when you guys sort of feel like they, want to make those decisions. So get it out of the way before the season, get it out of the way before their camp starts, and usually late July, early August. So I'm looking at summer as definitely more action than spring, and that's part of the calendar these days. 5 times
the amount. I mean, seriously, they could easily get. Let's see where their class is, obviously after spring, but 10 commitments in a 6-week, 7-week span in the summer is realistic. Where I think Like I was writing that story the other day about storylines for spring. I originally was going to put it over under it, and I was like, oh, you're just setting yourself up to get ridiculed. But if I was going to do a spring over under, it would have been 2.5. I think Haskell makes a lot of sense. There'll be some kind of Matthew Kanu or something like that who circles back, and then maybe you get one of those guys who was a Penn State fan growing up and says, screw it. I don't really want to drag this out longer. So that was kind of my mindset with that. But
also,
go ahead.
Also in the spring, you're trying to nail down any portal guys that you're trying to get in. So the really interesting thing to me here is that the portal window closes before the spring game for Penn State, but it also opens when you're still in spring ball. Yeah, how about that? You're also still in spring ball. So you can bring those guys in to check out a practice or something, which they're probably not going to get at most schools that are recruiting them. Could mean nothing, but it could be one of those things where you get to see and interact and figure some things out and take more information away than you would from a typical official visit when you're just going around and eating and, sitting in the room talking to the coaches.
Yep. T-Frank, do you want to say something or you just want to hang out?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
All right.
Don't come to me. I don't trust.
All right.
You.
All right.
I'm here to end the show because I'm the only one that can turn this off. So you guys keep talking.
I always wondered how that would work. We had a question earlier from Ryan, who was always here. He talked about Emmanuel Iheanacho. And this is an interesting one to me because he said he heard that Maryland led. We've talked about that, on the board quite a bit in the last month or so, that Maryland was in the best position right now. Sort of, I would say, similar to Zion Ali. Like it's going to be a situation where that kind of stuff makes it hard for him to say no to Maryland, if that makes sense. This is going to be, as we've mentioned before, an expensive one. It's going to be one where other schools are going to make late pitches. But yeah, I think Maryland's positioned themselves well in the early going, and how all that works with the last 7 or 8 months of the cycle, I don't know, but I do know that Penn State doesn't have a ton of confidence in that one right now. Ryan, where do you think he's at in the fall? Like that's really what I think about with him and Zion as well, is how does this all work out if Mike Locksley continues to have the same season over and over again. And, I know a lot of things will help make those decisions, but at the same time, it's not like, it's tough to say for like Texas A&M that's shelling out whatever, or was shelling out whatever. It makes sense because there's some sort of tradition there and there's some sort of broad national appeal. But with Maryland, and I know the stay home, the local stuff is great. And a lot of guys flourish in that situation, but at the same time, you're still in the same general atmosphere that you've always been.
Yeah. A couple things I would say. One, the season is 3 months long. The off season is 9 months long. When you're Mike Locksley, you need to win the off season because you're not winning much during the season. So it makes a lot of sense for him to be incredibly aggressive and get fans excited about those guys. Second thing I would say is I've talked to people in the past. I will not say names, but I will say that schools certainly don't have problems with very highly committed or highly recruited players committing to schools that they believe are beneath them and letting them stay there for a while so they can circle back later on and say, are you sure you want to do this? And oh, by the way, now we're willing to match whatever you have financially. I'm pretty confident that a lot of schools will say, yeah, go ahead, commit to Maryland now if that's what you guys want to do. Let you watch the season, see how things play out. And then, by the way, if we really want you in the end, we're going to circle back, especially if you had a very strong season. So I think a lot of schools are playing that card right now with Zion, Ellie, and Iheanacho. They don't need to put money and all those things out there. It makes sense why Maryland would, right? They need wins and they need to be aggressive, and that's a win for Mike Locksley. Whether it's a win next December, come signing day, time will tell. But to me, if you're Georgia and some of these other elite programs, even at Penn State, like I personally, I don't think Penn State's going to get Zion Ellie or Emmanuel Iheanacho. I just think that the money that's going to be involved with those guys is going to be more than what Penn State's really willing to ever do for a freshman. But there are a lot of Southern schools who are willing to do that. And again, just from talking to people who I know work in the industry, I don't think they have any problem with those guys committing to Maryland at this stage.
Yeah, it's why would you get into a bidding war right now? Why would you find yourself in a situation where you're driving up that number and finding yourself at the end of the day, Juddy, with something that you can't win at the end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, like say 3 SEC schools are competing with Maryland right now. As you said, you're just making the number higher when it really matters in December. So let them take whatever money they're being offered right now. Let them commit. We'll see what happens. But at the end, that's where it really matters. And I have no doubt in my mind that those two are going to be incredibly pressured by other programs to flip at the end. Do I think it'll be Penn State? No, I really don't.
South Carolina is one that just you see the mix there, and they've got a bit of buzz with Beamer, even though they're not quite not a playoff team or anything like that. But you've got a situation where the buzz seems to be higher. Florida is interesting. I don't know if it makes sense for those guys, but Florida, we saw how they recruited off of was it 6-6 this year? Which was an impressive 6-6. Don't get me wrong, which is a hell of a sentence, but an impressive job there. But you're still in Florida. You still have the draw and the tradition, all that kind of stuff. So programs that might not necessarily be the Georgia or the Alabama or the Ohio State, but find themselves in that middle where they, have to, I don't want to say overcompensate, because I don't know the market value for those guys, but overcompensate to get where they want to get. So it's going to be interesting battles for both down the stretch. And again, I agree with you that if I were looking at Penn or mocking Penn State's class right now, neither would be in it. But it's just it's very interesting how these priorities and these things will change and evolve over time.
You didn't mention Oregon.
I didn't
remember Oregon. You remember Oregon because they are. I get it. I understand why it doesn't make sense for those guys to go out there, but they're getting wins in that region right now, and they were both. Oregon was like top 3 with both of them at one point, and I know that they will be incredibly aggressive at the end if they want them. Time will tell.
I was just staying on the East Coast, but Oregon makes sense for both of those guys. You want Oregon to not make sense for guys like Messiah Hampton, guys like Kari Adams. Those guys that they're certainly a danger. I think I think Adams was or is going out there in the spring, so that's definitely a tough one to have to deal with. And there's so many levels to this in terms of who's willing to spend, who's willing to do what. Phil Knight is willing to spend. There's no discussion about that. Will they get beat for kids? Absolutely. But is it a situation where they're getting beat for kids because they don't want to put the full force behind it? No, it's not the case. So I think that's an important distinction there. Z-Man mentioned Tennessee as well. That's a interesting one. Joey O'Brien's been there a couple of times. I think Damari Simeon was going there or is going to go there and check some things out. So Tennessee is, hey, they've got a reputation, man. That's not no way around that. So
they weren't really in the mix with Ellie though. Iheanacho a little bit, but not really with Ellie. I agree with what Z-Man's saying as far as money goes, but as far as school that they used to were real serious about, I never got that vibe.
Yeah, I'm thinking the broad sense of Penn State prospects right now, and just in terms of how much they, because you're at a point with Penn State where, this is kind of going back to the old Florida recruiting conversation where, you're going to get a certain tier, you're going to be in it for a certain tier of guys, but you're also not going to be in it for a certain tier of Florida guys that are Florida State, Florida, Miami, that they definitely want because of the external circumstances there, the travel, the accessibility, all that stuff that we talk about all the time. So it's kind of you've got to lock down these guys in region. They've upped their NIL game. They've done a nice job in terms of being competitive, but at the same time, you're not going to certainly win them all against guys that are going full blast in certain areas.
I don't have much else, Sean. We can talk about guys that are planning to be here in a month, but I don't really know if that's worth it just because.
No, the people are already stuck in the official visit guys, so I'm not. I don't want to jump too
hit
far
the button.
There's our button guy.
Hello, Mr. Robot. I can hear you.
Ryan, you talked to Jordan Deck, right? I don't know that we've talked about on the show, but this is a kid from Texas. Got an official visit with the setup to Penn State. He's pretty highly rated, and the safety board, as we talked about it earlier, I think is really good and deep and much more widespread than I thought it would be. We talked about O'Brien and we talked about Gebhardt and Daryl Carey at DeMatha. Makes a lot of sense for Penn State. But at the same time, they're bringing in a bunch of guys from out of the region and out of nowhere, essentially, for some of these guys. And Jordan Deck's one of these guys at safety that fits what Dex likes to do.
Deck, not Dex. Dex recruitment is very interesting to me because I know. I almost, Anyway, he's okay. Here's his unofficials. It's Baylor, Oklahoma, SMU, Texas A&M, multiple trips to these schools. And yet Baylor's the only official visit that he has set. So to me, is this his opportunity to see all these other schools without having to pay for it? Because if it is, and you want to make a decision in the summer, why don't you move these visits up? In my opinion, because he wants to make a decision in the summer and he says he wants to see these schools multiple times, but like he's not going to get a chance to do that, especially because he has spring practice here down in Texas starting up here in 2 weeks. So it's just an interesting one because what he's done in the past and what he's planning to do with his official visits, and also what he says, which is that he would like to get to Penn State, more than one time if that's the school he's going to really end up at. It just doesn't add up with at the same time he wants to commit in July. So to me, it seems like a recruitment that's kind of still wide open, and maybe not quite the right word, because I would think that Baylor makes the most sense, but at the same time, it's just kind of all over the place a little bit with what he wants to do. So I think in some ways that's good for Penn State because all it's going to take with him maybe is one visit that he really loves, and boom, you could become that school. But at the same time, I get the vibe that like, okay, say he's going to Colorado, Ole Miss, Michigan, Penn State, and I thought Baylor was the other. Like if he goes to any of these other schools and commits shortly after that official visit, like how locked in is that commitment really? Like I've only talked to the kid for 10 minutes and I was like, man, you got a lot to figure out still.
Well, maybe you get him to enroll in the class of 2025, like Max Granville, and then you don't have to deal with it during the stretch or down the stretch. So, yeah, no, it's very interesting because you look at the safety board, and like I said, Deck was not really on our radar. I know Dex went out and visited a bunch of guys in January, but like, how serious are some of those? I don't know. So,
like Caden Hall, for example, he's another one.
Yeah. I mean, you've got opportunities to impress some guys. First, you got to get there. Like you got to get them on campus in June, that's a long time from now. Like we're going to talk a lot of different names and a lot of different scenarios before then. But yeah, it's a really interesting position to sort of try and nail down because obviously they got Sieg and they're really happy with Matt Sieg, and you've got Joey O'Brien, who is maybe your top overall target when you take into account everything that goes that goes on that. And
up there.
Hey, maybe he's a wide receiver. Who knows? So we'll open that can of worms at some other point because we got to get going, and NCAA basketball starts in an hour and 15 minutes. So can't wait to.
I hope you don't have YouTube TV, T. Frank, because I don't think you're gonna be watching wrestling and hoops much. If you do,
I do.
Oh no, it's even worse. Okay.
No, this is terrible. This is ruined.
Oh my goodness.
You want to hit the TV?
Hey, thank you all for watching today. I understand if you don't come back next Thursday, but please do.
Yes. Thank you for joining us. And by the way, join us at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We will be talking. We got our Friday chat thread coming up tomorrow, which is usually pretty popular. It will be fun to follow the basketball, even though Penn State basketball not in there. But you can join right now for just $1. Follow the page. Hey, you know what? Even if we didn't give the best technical performance today, still like the video today because it helps us and it helps us get out there. So we appreciate everybody in the chat. And Beach Wine guy said it best. Spring practice talk next week. Let's bridge that gap. Get us there. Be on the lookout for schedule changes because James Franklin does have a press conference on Tuesday, the first day of spring practice. So T. Frank, I don't know if you can text those to me or right now, or if you want to put them on Twitter, but there will be probably a show schedule change next week just because of the logistics of spring practice starting.
And also, if anyone wants to start a GoFundMe for T. Frank's internet, I'll start that up later.
I mean, when you live in the woods, this is what you get. I mean, he's like in the middle of
for internet. I pay for great internet. I don't.
Sounds like you do.
Internet.
Yes. Yeah. Sounds like you do.
Okay.
All right, guys. Calling it. Thanks for joining us on Blue Widows Show.